Hello and welcome to a new edition of Shall We Talk. Today we're in the exhibition Disturbance Witch. I'm Laura Seidel and today we have two guests with us. We have artist Nathalie Anguezomo Mba Bikoro. She is a visual artist and independent curator based in Berlin. And then we have Katrin Köppert. She's a junior professor and researcher working at the Academy of Fine Arts in Leipzig. Welcome, I'm happy to have you here today. And we're in the exhibition curated by Olga Vostritsova and Olga Durbanu, which is about witches, and you can still see it until the end of the month. And if you walk into the exhibition space, you can see lots of female figures and lots of different types of witches, already suggesting that there's just not one type of witch. And then we have this title, Disturbance Witch, and I would like to ask you as an opening question, what do you think of a witch when you think of witches, and who are they potentially disturbing?
I think for me, it's interesting because I guess witch has always been connoted through fairy tale stories and also from a very Western gaze or Western idea. But I think for me, witch has the potentiality to be a group of communities or individuals that possess knowledge and that are doing things that are trying to disturb the system code that we know. And I think somebody who is moving into these spaces and trying to defy these systems of oppression acquires a knowledge and a practice that then is considered to be witchery. But for me, then it's a form of magic, because it's a form of escaping certain levels of abuses in society that is entrenched into a very capitalist nomination of how the world should be, how it should look like. And so I see as something that has a potential to create different forms of living and of being that is beyond the status quo that we know.
And then can you maybe tell us a little more, you've already mentioned points that really affect us all as a society and that are also very political topics, but can you maybe tell us a little more how it resonates in contemporary artistic practices and not just as a societal issue?
I think in the work of artistic practice, it can also, I think, ask different questions about where we are now in the society. So how we are responding to our own experiences, especially when we think of the pandemic situation, how this changes our interaction with people and who we are, how it's affecting our health and the way that we are meeting and organizing with each other. And it just opens up language also. What it does, that it gives you the possibility to see things in a different way and to access it in a different way that is very intimate to your own experience, right? So that can be in whatever form it can be, whether it's going to be visual or with sonics or with writing. It gives just different, not just interpretations, but different emotions and different kind of niches where people might see themselves and find the safety, and to say that there are other possible ways for me to move in the society and to not be in a system or in a situation of being oppressed, and thinking that it's okay because these are just the things that the way things are, and it's not. Mm-hmm. So if I can see that the potential for artistic practices that, also involving different collaborations within the community and having things happening in real spaces also is really important, because it gives a way for people to meet each other, to organize each other, and to have this intimacy, to share their experiences as a form of healing and of caring, which is really important right now also. And this can be done in different ways, especially when we think about historical archiving and decolonizing the knowledge that we already have. Mm-hmm. I think this is very necessary. Mm.
Yeah, can we maybe stick to this and dig a little bit deeper? because you're now saying that the witch also has this potential of resistance, and you're talking about healing and community. And then also in the exhibition, we can see a lot that the witch has become also a figure for feminist movement, and has been for many decades, but it's like getting a very popular category again. Why does it, what does it have to do with healing today, and what does it have to do with community, and is it a potentially more inclusive way of activism possible with the idea of a witch, or a different community building?
First of all, feminism can only be intersectional. So we have to also then rethink about the positions of feminisms and in which context they are from. And I think it's important because it allows to speak different experiences of different communities and people that we might not share the spaces with, you know. And also it's a very dangerous practice to stereotype the image of the witch as a woman. Because feminism, for me, in this case, would be something that is, as you say, is a form of resistance and a form of mutating and transforming into something that that has healing potential. So I'm thinking, you know, in terms of this is also beyond gender, but if we're really talking about, you know, the spaces for migrant spaces, trans communities, LGBTQ and everything, you know, like my father can be a witch because it will be in the way of how they resist to certain types of oppression and how they will find their tools to find safety nets for other people around them. So I think it's a very, it's a political endeavor for sure. But then, you know, for those systems of groups that oppress others, there's also there's a problem of language here because, you know, earlier you were talking about, you know, the situation or the image with Trump, for example, saying that this is a witch hunt against his campaign or what he stands for, etc. Because as long as there are different communities who do not believe in their own systems, then you're always going to have in between these models of oppression, right? But the problem is that oppression is based also on the model and history of colonialism. And this is, for me, the history of witchery. Where does this image of witch come from? And on the basis, it comes from a system from colonialism.
Yeah, I think you said so many things that I really find interesting and great about thinking about the maybe activist potential of the idea of witches. That you said it can include also men, or it can also include all sorts of women that usually or often are not included in feminist movements. And when we were here with the curators, we also talked about this like famous Italian exclamation that it's like you should be scared of the daughters of the witches that you couldn't burn, that it also has this potential of being threatening to societal oppressive structures. And yeah, maybe this could also be a good entrance to talk about the program that you have created to go along with the show, because you've already mentioned the entanglements of the idea of the witch and also colonial structures. Maybe you can explain this a little further, because you have curated, Katrin, the program Feminist MagiX, Decolonial Inlets. And then you collaborate for each chapter with artists and theorists and art educators. And for the last one, it's a collaboration among the two of you. So maybe before we talk about this specific chapter and edition, and also how this is a challenging progress to host events and plan art education during a pandemic, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the program. What is it about? And also, what are the entanglements of colonialism and witches?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, when Alba and Olga asked me to curate the program accompanying the exhibition, the figure of the witch for me as a queer feminist did not resonate at all somehow, because I mean, maybe this also has to do with something with my background, being raised in the GDR, and they haven't been B.B. Blocksberg or something like I could refer to in terms of popular culture, and also later, also because I'm maybe, let's say, more an analytical person, the witchery or questions of magic have not been part of my political practice or my thinking. But the point of departure was somehow, that's what, as you already mentioned, the question in how far the witch as the figure, and especially the witch hunt, is being deployed by right-wing extremists and movements in a way claiming to be the victims nowadays. And this is this weird, as Simon Strick says, discourse piracy, which is happening at this very moment, is for me the point of departure to reclaim the witch in a way, as it is within the colonial history. Since, I mean, also Silvia Federici has this long chapter on how far the witch is very much interwoven into into colonialism, into slavery, and that's why it was really important to, when I do some program, to already have this dimension of decolonizing or using witchery in the way to already questions of how to not only decolonize somehow the figure of the witch, but also the practices in terms of, I mean, let's say the German histories of feminist movements, which has not been very inclusive, and which, I mean, though we do have a longer history of Afro-German feminism, it, only in the last couple of years, it somehow more publicly and more consciously became a discourse, and that's why it somehow this was part of or point of departure, but of course already that it was clear that I cannot do this by my own, because it would be weird to have or to raise the questions of how to decolonize whatever, and we will talk about this, I guess, later on, contemporary art spaces at all, and how far is this possible within this European-centric and post- and neo-colonial conditions, but that's why it was clear as a white positioned person, I don't want to do this by my own, and it was very important to invite other co-curators, which in the end I wish it would have worked more collaboratively, not only between me and the co-curator for every chapter, maybe to have it more as a collective for the whole series, but also then we had the pandemic situation, which somehow made it more difficult to enact at all, because I mean it just was crazy also the last months for me. I mean, I cannot imagine how it must feel crazy for women with children and for people in the reproductive section like care work and so on, and that's why again, as you also said, the whole aspect of rethinking the witch in this historic context of having been the women that were in the care work and which were not acknowledged and their reproductive labor. So here we have the chance to somehow use this brutal situation to fundamentally rethink the valuation of reproductive work, and which also ties into the question how to create art spaces which deal with questions of infrastructures of care, which are not just seen in artworks, but also the whole question how to deal with each other. Ideally, I mean, not that I would claim that everything we did now worked well. I mean, also failure is in in the middle, in the center of it.
Yeah, I think also generally the task of art education and how it is sometimes treated as like something you can just leave to the side or not as important, which I find is one of the most important aspects of, like, as you said, like having a community, have people come into the exhibition, and also not to presume that everybody can just come here and see and then know what everything's supposed to mean as this overall exhibition. And also it's like a big chance to create new communities, to start new dialogue. And so maybe you can tell us a little more, because both of you have curated this chapter, and then also you in your work as an artist try to like evoke dialogue, and like also throughout your artistic research. How did it go planning an event that is supposed to be about community, about exchange, and also then still addressing a very political, and in Germany especially heavily ignored political topic during a pandemic? How could you plan? How could you engage with the show and the topic?
I think from what I understood is that the line of thinking with the series was that art is not there to represent a topic or something that is interesting and to say, you know, to nominate what is the given. It was more to actually think of different experiences. And I think I understood that this practice in art, and we're thinking about incantations of witchery, you know, so the practice of which, what does it mean in different contexts also, which is also very excluded from the context in Germany that we are living here. Is that I think what we try to do is to find the synergy of experiences and to communicate different experiences through a level of intimacy with groups of people, right? So this could be done in sort of like workshop formats, through writing, through sonically as well. And actually, the moment of this pandemic was extremely difficult, really challenging, because it made you have to think very quickly on how to create the space and change it in, you know, in a flash of light. Because then I felt that we didn't have this intimacy, right? So in the last chapter that we will talk about later, it was very much centering on Black feminist experiences, and also who was going to be in the room and who's going to do this invocation and this event on healing and being together. And this is not possible right now. So how do you be together in this time of pandemic? And I think when I think of work of people who are resisting and who are doing forms of healing, it is about how you connect and how you reach out with other people. So now if we're talking in this digital form, and I think it has to then be at a level that's very personal for the artists that were invited to do this, and it's not to present their work about a topic, but to present their own experiences and to say, you know, this is my story, which at some level we're always going to reflect our stories with other people, of course. And this is what I want to say in this time right now, what's happening. So it's funny that you highlight this experience as, you know, a series of failures, but I also think that these failures are also for us a new way of understanding. We are also learning a lot from it and unlearning what we already know, because, you know, what I appreciate actually is that in this system that we know, whether in academia or in the cultural industries, we are used to work in a particular way with certain limitations and certain boundaries and certain protocols. Now we are asked to do it differently. Mm-hmm. And we don't know how to do it differently. So we just have to go with the flow. We are making our own incantations. We are making our own ways to, within our domestic spaces, to find a way to reach out to each other, to listen to what we are doing, and to see each other in a different way. So I try to understand this as creating a different language. You know, when you prepare something, a form of escape or a form of resisting, it's like a chant, you know, it's like a song. You work for a specific rhythm until it comes, there's a synergy, a very high synergy where something is happening. And this is where the healing is heightened to its truest form in its force. And this is, so it's, I think this for me is a really important moment historically to observe in terms of how these institutions can change, because I think it's a chance for that we don't go back to the way we were. You know, we always say, well, when are we going to go back to normal? I do not want to go back to normal, because the normal that was then was oppressing certain, you know, a lot of communities, and it was entrenched in a tradition of colonial practice that is now being a little bit more porous, you know. It's giving different types of imagination, different practices for people to activate and to reflect. And one of the things that I found was very important in this time for people to resist was the action of resting. Because, you know, and this is what Audre Lorde was talking about, and also Toni Morrison, that, you know, in order to take care of yourself, you have to rest, you have to deaccelerate, you have to slow down. And that is a form of resistance. It's a work, it's a labor, you know, just as when, you know, with parenthood also, there is no one way to be a parent. Yeah. There's all these different forms that there has to be all valued, you know, in its highest form, and be supported. So I think I see a potentiality. I see right now in this in this work there are two dangers. That either there's a strengthening of going back to normalization and having the corruption within art institutions too, to actually just preserve this practice of display and interpretation because of the you know, the incapacities or the limitations of the digital format especially, but it's also maybe a chance for actors like us to, you know, to create much more porosity within these systems as well, to make them fragile. So it can, I think it's, you know, it can go both ways. But I was thinking in this series how to, you know, to navigate and to narrate these chapters in those ways, so that, you know, because I think, like you said, the story was not to make an interpretation of what a witch is or what witchery is, but actually it's a system of how we can think about resisting and healing and resting whilst we are, you know, whilst we are sick. Also, because we understand that the practice that we know as curators and also as artists, that we have been trained in a very white, westernized system from the beginning. Therefore, then how do you decolonize that? Because, you know, we talk about, you know, the practice of decolonization within this practice, within this series, but how do we do that if all of the actors involved have been trained in this system? So what, you know, so I'm also trying to think critically about my own practice, you know, in this context here. And so, yeah, maybe you want to say more things about what has happened already.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is, I mean, there are so many topics right now at the table, but one is really the question, and this is one of the reasons the title is not decolonizing art or contemporary art or exhibition and so on. It's about this, I mean, decolonial inlet, and we can talk about what does it really mean, but it is at least the attempt to not claim that we are in the position to really decolonize something. It's just, I mean, I'm very much into thinking in minor forms, in micro-politics, and I think the inlet is this minor form which at least somehow can put something into the white system which might be a disturbance, or which might be at least a little deferral or a shift to something. But I wouldn't say with this series or with so many other events which are currently taking place under the title of decolonization, that there in the practices and in the hard facts of institutional structures something is completely changing. I don't see this at all, and but nevertheless, I'm because there's a text which is called "Decolonization is not a metaphor," and that's absolutely true. But I'm also not so convinced to already no longer talk about decolonization, because still it should be the horizon, and that's why there is a need to talk about. And but it's also the way where, who, in which situation, and so this is these are some thoughts in regard to why it's called Decolonial Inlet, and the other is exactly this, what happened now with the pandemic. It's really this ambivalence, the impossibility to create intimacy. For example, a room which was thought to be only for black and people of color. So the impossibility, but nevertheless in the series which took place, other chapters which took place online, there were these moments which I thought were at least interesting, because I mean I do teach at Zoom and WebEx all the time now, and my body is just me in front of this laptop. And then we had in the series the chapter with Marke Pereira, who did a yogathon session, and it was, I mean, I really do not want to say there was a decolonization of my body going on, but there was at least a shift in what are we doing. So we were really literally doing yogathon in front of our laptops in our rooms, and there was a moment which I found enabled to think about, where does now knowledge production really take place, and isn't this also already a shifted knowledge of how do we understand each other in regard to in regard to where does thinking and being together and practicing and designing situations do start. So that's why it's really this ambivalency of impossibilities, but so the porosities which now needs to be continued afterwards.
Yeah,
that's,
but I mean I also
danger.
totally agree that I don't have with the difficulties of institutions, like how will they change. I also don't think they will change much, to be honest. But what they are doing though is that they are really hijacking the moments of resistance and healing and feminisms. And I think what I see is that in order to it's more of I think it's with institutions it's still a practice of looting and colonial language by hijacking certain terms that are being developed on the ground by what they call minorities. So that's why I feel that, all of a sudden when they use these terminologies or this language, and then shift it, in a way that's basically going to oppress the people are supposed to be involved with. So, in order to decolonize the exhibitions or their spaces, say, now we're going to have, BIPOC communities involved. We want to hear your voices. We want to do something on Black histories. But yet in the production and making of these spaces, they do not acknowledge those voices. They use Black bodies without, making them visible, actually, without remunerating them, giving no contracts. So they are completely extracting the knowledge in that sense of the people who are really trying to shift, different ways in society. And And therefore, then we come back to a full circle, we come back to exactly to the point of where we are. And then, they are proud of what they do because they use the digital language also to format as if, yes, you can trust us, because now we understand what resistance is, and we are, solidifying our solidarities with you, but they are not. It's extractivism. And this is also something we talked about at some point when we discussed about the notion and the practice of solidarity. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of my friend Jennifer Kamau, who's directing the International Women's Space. And she said something very poignant, which is there are two things. There's solidarity, that's really something that is on the ground. And then there is holidarity, where that is what the institution do. So holidarity is basically, it's not a real form of working with your community. It's just say, yes, I support you, mm-hmm. but then you don't do anything. You don't do anything to resist and to solidify the work of what is being done. But you extract the knowledge, mm-hmm. in order to create a different platform that's going to only be of profit. And so this is also the danger of, when you are invited to do something like this, is also to think about this thing. Like, how are we supposed to, put out language and put out knowledge that is not going to be extractive, and especially when it's on a level that is very intimate, So, it was so many questions around these limitations of the pandemic. It's really, I can't even, but it's, I feel like I'm learning and unlearning this process all the time, and seeing when we think about the institutions that we work in and how we work, we have to change it, but permanently, not to change because it's happening now, right now, mm-hmm. but after. What will happen after also? I do not want to go back to this time of normalization, because that's the time where that will be a reoppression.
Yeah, and you're right, it's also such a big problem that sometimes as an artist you get invited to then do the process of decolonializing the institution, and then afterwards, after this process is supposedly done, mm-hmm. then there is no long-term change, and also then no artists of color are becoming part of the institution because it's then now decolonialized, whatever that is supposed to mean. But also for your event coming up, and also for your practice in the different fields that you work in, I really like that for the description of the Feminist MagiX, that you said that you're taking disappointment as a point of departure, and the things that you've already mentioned, that you're now not trying to impose a new system or be like, now we have completed this and that process of decolonializing. What do you envision if you are more optimistic? What can the art education and curating and presenting art and showing and community building bring out of this pandemic? Or are there maybe, what is the potential of the work that we're all doing at the moment?
Maybe I'm also too exhausted to now be able to imagine beyond mm-hmm. The current situation in a way. Also, maybe you already introduced me, but maybe I should also mention I'm more familiar with academia, so that's mm-hmm. why it's probably up to you to answer what the cultural and art curatorial.
Yeah, I mean, it's just because for me it's a very tricky question to answer, only because mm-hmm. I tell you why, because it's always been asked to me. As if it's like, what is the solution? Is there something opposite we will? And often I feel in this regard sometimes that people wait with the answer with a notepad and trying to, say we have to do this and then we will decolonize everything, or there's a solution. And and you know what? The thing is, I think, it's not just, we're also simplifying also in the sense, the conversation as if, there's the system of oppression and then the other communities, but then also within our communities, there are complexities and it's difficult. So there are rifts And often that's how things, that's how movements work. Movements are there for one and they go and then disappear and a new one comes. And it's also like thinking about that's why it's difficult, because I believe in moments. I don't believe in something that can stay forever, but I believe in moments and synergies that can happen and how they can proceed over time, but that will be done with different people and communities, not always with the same, stone. But I think the best way is to really intervene in this moment that you are in, that's yours. And that is the time to do it now, not into thinking about the future. My future is now, I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking, no, my future is right now. That's where it's happening. So I'm not really interested into thinking about, decolonizing the institution. I'm really not interested on that at all. I really think that for me, it's about gathering intimacies with people around me to acquire this level of healing, strength, knowledge, and give the possibility to people to survive, and to have the truest forms of themselves. So, and this is what I do in my practice as a visual artist. It's very much, to the context of the city in Berlin and in Germany, and thinking about its colonial roots and system, and to intervene in public spaces. And how do I invite people in those talks into the public space? And because it's performative, no? So, and this is using different ways. There's different ways to be performative. You can be performative in whether it's what you say or with sound, even with images. But it's a way of how these things can. Nothing is fixed. It moves and it changes, and it's finding different voices of what happened in Seidel have been told before. So, we always concentrate on the most popular discourses or conversations that are happening, for example, with the Humboldt Forum and with the repatriation and memory with the genocide in Namibia, for example, and thinking always in direction to this institution. But that is not, that also has to happen on the ground with people. So actually, for me, what was important is to get the personal narratives, the intimate narratives, especially of Black women in the last 2 centuries in Berlin. So who were from different parts of the world, and trying to find these pockets and moments of resistance and healing amongst each other through different contexts, historical periods, and how this worked and how this failed. So it's more like intimate conversations with ghosts. So this is working with those type of archives. And that's what I wanted to do in this last chapter also, and thinking about the work of, Audre Lorde and Hortense Spillers, thinking about the truest form of yourself in this time of mutation as a way to explore, to protect yourself, but to explore different levels and practices of society. And so that we take on the phrase, and she says, to imagine a sea not bleeding. So spilling injury and correlations of the erotic. So she's talking about the power of the erotic, Audre Lorde, as a truest form of yourself, the potentiality of yourself, of your transformation, which can also happen especially in parenting or in motherhood. But also to imagine a sea not bleeding, thinking what would have happened without a history or system of oppression like colonialism, like the slave trade. So what if the sea was not bleeding? And that's why it's supposed to be a very intimate gathering that echoes like testimonies of narratives that are important historically in the context of within the discourses that we have now, but are not seen or are not valued.
Maybe just because I'm a huge fan, I don't know if you know her, Cara Kealing, who also beautifully writes about the question of what if. So what would be if oppression would not have existed colonial-wise? So, and starting from this speculative moment to create, not the future. So it's really about sticking to the present moment, but based upon the question, what if? And I think this is, maybe this, here comes full circle the question of MagiX and Feminist MagiX and Decolonial Inlets, to have this speculative moments also in regard to, I mean, this is a little bit also been done into Afrofuturist approaches to not only ask in regard to the future, but also to see the potential. I mean, although it's almost impossible to think, but to start from the small possibilities within the colonial history to then forge them to the present and anchor them in the present. So this is Cara Kealing's work, and this is, sorry, it just came up to me because you had this the sea not bleeding figure. That's why I think this somehow resonated. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I was thinking, like my question, I was thinking on a much smaller scale, but I really like what you said, that it's not always about the future or what is the ultimate solution, but what is happening in our current situation. And then for any sort of community building, or as you said, the intervention in public spaces, just literally anything. I really like that you said now is also lots of trial and error, because we're forced to like renegotiate our knowledge production. How do we can come together as a community at the moment only digitally? And I'm really wondering also if this situation that you've described with like failing on things that usually were much easier is also maybe just gonna change the way in like we think of this problem solution paradigm. And yeah, but when you talk about the very intimate exchange that you've described for the chapter that you were thinking of, is that does that include the audience, or how is the digital version of this chapter going to look like? Is there a small group of people coming together online, or?
No. I mean, it's totally different to the way we had envisaged it at the beginning, and it's still shifting and it's still changing. But what was, I'm also kind of responding to the wishes of what the artists, how they want it to be. Mm-hmm. And it was this level of security and intimacy, and then to create, since the whole idea was to come together and actually just create our own space, like create our own form of incantation, our own form of like, so that it's not just, you know, different people presenting their, you know, their practice, but really like negotiating space together. So we want to do this digitally through their own artistic processes and how the works speak to each other. So it's going to be like a digital conversation of the works in the making, and how they are in conversation together on the, you know, what we just talked about through the work of Audre Lorde and Hortense Spillers, how they're responding to that. So the idea would be that the event is like an incantation itself. So it's calling on your ancestors as a form of meditation. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a thing of itself. So it's not just a presentation. Oh, now we have this artist doing this. Now this artist doing this, and this other. But we have these works coming into synergy, mm-hmm, together to create this moment and this piece that is like a incantation gathering, I hope. But it's trial and error, you know. The digital space is not so generous sometimes. So, but it's want to try it this way.
So, but then everybody's experiencing it at the same time. And I imagine you mentioned the yogaton, which I'm assuming is a combination of yoga and reggaeton. Mm-hmm. And then you also had this at a shared experience, and everybody's doing it in front of their own computers.
Yeah, right. It was synchronized, so it wasn't recorded beforehand. It was really, in this very moment that we somehow did it together, though we were isolated in our own places. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining me today in the Disturbance Witch show, which you can see until the end of April.